Good morning, everybody on YouTube. This is Rick Thomas from Obsolete Video Services. Hey guys, we are pretty much almost finished fixing this Sony Bvw-70, and boy oh boy, this thing was a nightmare to repair. Anyways, as I suspected, we had two bad motor drive spindles that drive the spindles and fast forward and rewind on the very bottom of the unit. They had quite a bit of hours on them, and the bearings on those things are kind of like locking up, and when that happens, they don't want to spin. Well, the lower bearings in the bottom were not on the motors. You have a bearing on each spindle that hits this spindle and this spindle. Both bearings on both motors had a lot of hours on them, and maybe from the deck sitting, God only knows, but they wouldn't spin very good. They're very, very tight, and they're not supposed to be doing that because there's bearings in there. And that was causing when the tape would load, it would cause it to go into standby position after about 3 minutes. Well, we actually ended up getting it to play now. As you can see, I changed out both drive motors on this unit. Yeah, that was a nightmare. When the drive motors go bad, it's usually either because the deck's been sitting for a very, very long time, which I suspect, because the swing arm and the loading ring mechanism were hard as a rock, couldn't even move them. Had to replace the swing arm, and I had to break down the other mechanism and re-lube it and take it apart, which took a little bit to do. And then I had to go in and realign everything else, put the loading ring back in. Not a very good picture, but it shows that this has been sitting for a very long time. I mean, without a doubt, because the swing arm was locked in position, and once those go bad, and if they've been sitting a long time, you can't break them free. You have to totally replace them. So I had to order a brand new swing arm. I had to break the mechanism down. I had to realign everything. I had to fix the lock gauges that actually lock it into play position. Once the capstan roller comes around, you have like a solenoid that pushes that across. That wasn't working right, so I had to go in and clean that, align it, and get that back in place. So this thing had a lot of issues. Plus, the loading carriage was kind of screwed up. I had to go in and re-grease and re-lube that. And I also had to break down the hard grease in this thing. All the mechanisms and grease in this thing were really screwed up. So I had to break everything down and redo it completely, on top of replacing some parts that I didn't really expect to have to do. So I'm going to have to let the customer know this will be an extra charge on this repair, because there was some extra parts I did have to install on this beyond what originally was wrong with it. It was sitting for a long time, you can tell. My suspicion is maybe they had this sitting in their case and didn't use it for a long time, maybe in storage somewhere, and that happens. A lot of TV stations that own these things, they haven't been used in a long time, and they put them in shelves or on racks, and they just don't use them. The worst thing you could do about Betacam SP and broadcast Recorder-O-Matic machines is not use them, because there's a lot of greasy components. The oily components, they got to be moving all the time. If they're not moving, you're going to have a serious problem. If you leave them sit for 10 years or more, the deck is just not going to work. So you have to go and you have to redo everything on these things when they sit for a long period of time. This deck has been sitting for a godforsaken long time. I can tell because it took so much work to get this done. This mechanism is probably one of the worst ones I've seen in a long time, because it is rock solid. Couldn't even move a lot of components on it. Had to take the components out. So after I took the loading ring out and took all the mechanism parts out, I had to replace them and rebuild them and re-lube them and get them all back to where they belong. Then you have to go on this particular mechanism. You have to do all the alignment, which is a whole nother story on this deck. You need to know how to do it. I haven't done one of these probably in about a year. So, you have to refresh your memory on your work after a while. And, of course, I've been doing this stuff for 30 years. But, it's like riding a bike. You don't forget how to do it. But what's really throwing me off is the biggest problem was the playback and rewind spindles. Those were completely screwed up. That's because the bearings inside, the grease in the bearings of those spindles, when they sit too long and get hard as a rock, they don't want to spin when you engage current to those motors. Bearings have grease in them, and grease gets hard as a rock. If the decks are sitting a long, long time, you might as well just say, oh, screw it. You're going to have to replace your spindles now. which is what we did. We changed out the spindles with some units that I had. I had a couple repair spindles that I had for this particular model. I happen to have them, and I had to change them out. This was not an easy fix. This thing had a ton of problems. Complete mechanism lockup. That's one of the reasons the error codes were going like crazy. Lower motors, drive motors had to be replaced from sitting. Hard grease inside of those things. The bearings get bad, they don't want to spin, then you have to replace them. You can't take those motors apart. They're all self-contained, so you have to replace them if they don't work. And seems that the cards are all working properly. The servo and all the other cards, modulation, everything seems to be working okay on this deck. But I assume this is just going to be a transfer deck that they're going to be using for playing tapes back in the studio. I think this came from a television station, from what I'm able to tell. It looks like it's a television station from what I can see from the customer who sent this to me. He's going to be very pleased to see this thing working, because this thing was an absolute freaking nightmare. But I've been working on these a long time. And once you work on these, you kind of, you learn from problems and why certain things do what they do, and why it doesn't stop or play, and why it doesn't load or engage. But the biggest problem with this one, besides the mechanism problem, the mechanism is a very complex thing. It's got to be aligned. It's got sensors. It's got alignments. It's got everything, and everything's got to work together. So we had to change out the belt. We had to rebuild the loading spindle motor and get all the grease and get all the gook out of that and get that all freed up. And then we had to replace the swing arm and the loading ring mechanism, which was completely locked up. They wouldn't move at all. So that was a major problem with the tape trying to load. But even if they did get the tape to load, they wouldn't play because the spindles and the motors were bad. So now we got it up to this point. Got it actually playing. That's good. This is what I like to see. So we got the actual deck playing. So we'll be getting this out to this guy real soon. Hope you guys enjoyed this video.